And so one of the things that comes out of our passage today is really, what do you think of yourself as a man? Well, what does it mean to be a man in terms of just what you would do in terms of things you like or don't like, or things you would take charge of or not take charge of? Like don't ask a man to shop for more than 5 items. And if you're asking him 5 items, give him a list of what those items are. Don't ask him to find the cumin and the tarragon, because he won't. He might think they're like, well, they are foreign things, but what you do with your body, the bodily operation, in terms of that. But a funny thing that I saw is a therapist asks a man and says, your wife tells me that you never buy her flowers. And the man's response was, well, I didn't know my wife sold flowers. Her flowers, bought her flower. So anyways, in the book of Judges, we are dealing with just the after efforts of Gideon in terms of what he has done to gain this great victory with only 300 men. And another message that comes out of this passage, how quickly things can go wrong, go from good to bad, and then stay that way. And so again, the last time we were here, the Ephraimites were complaining about the fact that Gideon did not allow them to be at the beginning of the beginning of the war, but they were called in afterwards. And so therefore, again, this chapter 8 is a curious chapter, but we went through the first part of this. But basically, as you can get to the end of that slide and then really go to the map, I probably should have put the map first, because we talk about these 2 cities that Gideon in his chasing the Midianites to eventually Kakor. Basically, you go to Sukkot and Peniel. You see those 2 cities right here. And then basically what he does is he's got with 300 men chasing these kings of Midian, Zeba and Zalmunna. And so basically they say, hey, come help us, give us bread, give us food, give us provisions in terms of our chasing. And they say, well, are those kings in your hands? Have you already captured them? And no, the point is we're chasing them. Well, we're not going to give you help. And so that's the story that comes out of chapter 8. And so eventually Gideon and his men do defeat the Midianites. 15,000 are left over from the $135,000 army that the Midianites have, and Gideon with his 300 defeat them as well. And so basically, what Gideon then does is he disciplines those 2 cities. He takes the men of Sukkot and he brings them out and beats them with brush and brambles in terms of what he would have. And then he goes to Penuel like he said he would and destroys their tower. And people died in the context of that. So again, Gideon, to the extent that he was right to do that, thinking too much of himself, whatever. But now we're in this scene in chapter 8 where he's got these 2 kings of Midian. And so basically, he goes to the kings of Midian and says to them, what did you do when you were in my position and you had my brothers in front of you? What did you do to them? And the kings admitted, we killed them. And so therefore, Gideon says, what you did to them, I'm going to do to you. But then he goes to his son and says, you do it. You kill them. And so therefore, just picking up in chapter 8, verse 18, it says here again what I already said in verse 18. Then he asked Zeba and Zalmunna, what kind of men did you kill at Tabor? Men like you, they answered, each one with the bearing of a prince. Gideon replied, those were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I would not kill you. Now turning to Jether, his oldest son, he said, kill them. But Jether did not draw his sword because he was only a boy and was afraid. Zeba and Zalmunna said, come do it yourself. As is the man, so is his strength. So as the man, so is his strength. So Gideon stepped forward and killed them and took the ornaments of their camels' necks. So I want to just highlight that statement that comes from an unbeliever in terms of what he's saying about manhood and what we should be as men. I imagine maybe that is the phrase they used in their day to say man up. Like we say man up, put your big point boy pants on, in terms of saying, as is the man, so is his strength. And so again, we have to think about what we are as men in terms of what we would do on taking on responsibility, in leading, and in being a model, being an example, not just expecting people to do what we say because we have a position, but because we have the character and nature and the compassion in terms of how we were dealing with ourselves. So there is a point for us to make in the context of this. It's something that I have said to my son. As a boy runs away from responsibility, a man runs toward it. A boy runs away from responsibility, a man runs toward it. In other words, men do not think in terms of who can I blame, who can I point fingers on, who can I have someone else do and take care of this thing that ultimately I should take care of. And so again, rather than running away with responsibility we take care. Like if you have the means to do something, you have the means to affect a life, to intervene in a situation, you do that. Now we do that under the counsel of God and the guidance of God. Certainly we can't do everything. We can't fix every problem, but the things that we are more directly associated with, and if there's a way for us to intervene, you intervene. Like you don't wait for someone else to move when the right thing is for you to move. And it's usually a right thing for us to move. Oftentimes I'm saying to men, have that conversation. Talk to your wife. Like maybe she's actually putting responsibility on you, and maybe some of those responsibilities are right, and sometimes those responsibilities are wrong, but at least have a conversation to define those things and wonder what she's thinking and why she's thinking the way she's thinking. Because again, you're going to be thinking differently, but you engage in the conversation. You make it comfortable for your wife to talk. I also do say a boy lives for today, a man plans for tomorrow. Again, a boy just thinks about, I want to have fun today. I want to do all the things that rev me up and make me excited and so on and so forth. But what about tomorrow? What's happening in your decisions today that are going to affect your life tomorrow? And that's what a man thinks in terms of. Again, what am I doing today that's creating a tomorrow that is better, that is more godly, that is, ultimately better in terms of God's economy, but part of that is, what am I putting forth in terms of my family? What am I providing for in terms of my situation? And so again, maybe the better statement that I have is what I have written down here. We don't point the finger at someone else or try to find someone else to blame. We take responsibility and do the work to fix what is broken, especially if we played a part in breaking it. And again, sometimes those responsibilities are coming from our children, coming from our wives. And again, we sift through those in terms of just what we would internalize and what we would do. But, think more about what you can do as opposed to what you can't do. When the resolution is you as a man, and I would say in some ways an adult, it's not like you women are off scot-free, but you don't think in terms of, let me do the less as I can. That's rarely the conclusion you should come to. It's usually that it's what's the most that I can do? What's the most that I can internalize and take care of and intervene in? And so, like another aspect of, what Ziba and Zalmunna are saying here is the man so is his strength, is when the going gets tough, the tough keep going. Again, we continue to persevere through. Like, okay, you have one conversation. Maybe you're not a good communication person. You don't really talk well. Well, great. Have the conversation, make your mistakes, admit your mistakes, and then have another conversation and get better at it. Again, continue to work until it's fixed, until it's right, until there's vulnerability and truth and honesty and purity in every aspect of life. God does not like secrets. Relationships do not work in the environment of secrets. It's all out in the open in terms of who we are, what we're doing, what we're thinking. Again, how do I move things forward in terms of how I become the best husband, the best father, the best leader, the best godly man that I can be? And so again, when the going gets tough, the tough keep going. Naturally, in the power of God. Like this is the strength of God operating in us. It's an unbeliever saying this, but the truth and reality is what God places us in terms of the roles we have as men, what He equips us for, in terms of what we would be. We just continue to seek and press forward in terms of those things. So again, I like, in a chapter that doesn't have much redeemable, that is one redeeming thing in terms of what we would think about as far as being a man. But I also like verse 22 and 23 as well. So it says here, and again, Judges chapter 8, verses 22 and 23. So the Israelites, after Gideon has all this victory, all the success in battle, the Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us out of the hand of Midian." But Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." And so again, a good statement from Gideon in terms of all that he would have coming towards him, the regard that he would have. It is almost reminiscent of George Washington after he wins the revolution, and everyone is applauding what he did in the light of less numbers and this small fledgling country beating the Empire of Britain. What? How could that happen? And so people come to George Washington. "You should be king. You're like, take advantage of this situation." And George Washington said, "No how, no way." In fact, even him being president is something George Washington really didn't want. Even establishing the fact that, hey, you know something? 2 terms. I'm doing this 2 times. In other words, it's not healthy for one person to be the one that is regarded as having too much power and too much influence. So again, but Gideon doesn't follow through on what he's saying here. But again, the statement itself is good. And it is reminiscent of, in some ways, our role with each other as well as my role with you. And that is to say, the best thing that I can do for you is increase your dependence on God and not on me or anyone else. When you think about what we do for each other and how we would intervene in each other's lives, what we are ultimately trying to do is point people to the great provision that God is. A human being can be helpful. They can come and encourage. They can come and support. They can come and guide and teach and all the things that we would receive from each other. But the greater consolation, the greater minister, the greater availability, the greater power is always in God. And so therefore, the best thing that any of us can do for each other is point you to God. So again, as Gideon is saying here, don't look at me. Don't think that I should be the one that leads you. It's God that should lead you. And so therefore, the other part that I would point to is it's so important for you to understand your personal responsibility for your spiritual growth. Like I would say that you don't come here on Sunday mornings, you don't come here on a Wednesday night or to a Bible study to grow spiritually. Like that's not the primary thing that happens. Because just imagine that you were going to try and grow healthily and you ate on Sunday. I just come and I eat on Sunday and I'm good the rest of the week, right? No, you eat every day, right? And so therefore, the point that I'm making here is that it's more important what you're doing day in and day out with God in terms of seeking Him, being in His Word, being in His Spirit, being in His prayer, and interacting with Him. There's a point in time where the army, the emphasis, the tagline for the army was, "Be all you can be." Remember that? But then it changed at some point where the message was an army of one. Where the military, even in their connectedness and their troops and their command and so on and so forth, in terms of how they would be dependent on each other, they wanted every soldier to understand you should be prepared by yourself to do what you need to do. And so therefore, in some ways, that's a fitting description of what we are as believers. In terms of all the things that we face, all the temptation that comes our way, all the challenges that might make us afraid or disappoint us or make us angry or make us proud or whatever it might be. People can't be there. They can't be in your hearts. I can't be there saying, "Don't think that, don't say that, don't go there." But God can. That's the nature of the Spirit. And so therefore, the more you engage with Him and get to know Him, now He is your counselor. He is the one that you're gaining power from. And to realize that the God of the universe makes that available to everyone. Everyone can be a spiritual giant. Everyone can have the wisdom of God. Everyone can have the Holy Spirit in them, leading and guiding and convicting and encouraging and empowering and giving you gifts and having you live in those. Everyone can do that. And so therefore, now when we come together, what that is, what is it? That's an exaltation party. It's look at what God has done through us, what great things He is. And, maybe on some level what I do on a Sunday morning is define doctrine, like define how you think about this or that, encourage and inspire, maybe teach you something that you maybe couldn't get out of the Bible yourself. But again, it's not the necessary food that you would have throughout your week. So again, to recognize your responsibility as an individual to grow in Christ, to grow in knowledge, to grow in power, to grow in wisdom. It doesn't mean, well, I think I have one more statement before I get to the last one. Something that I would tell my kids, if I do for you what you can do for yourself, I'm actually hurting you, not helping you. And that would be true for me in the ministry I would have in your life and what other people would have in your life. The last statement I make, it's certainly not wrong to ask for help. I don't want to discourage you. If you need help, you ask for help in terms of how I or others would minister to you. But the bottom line is, if you are asking me to do something that supplements what you ultimately should have in yourself, your dependence on me is hurtful to you. And realize that sometimes I'm not doing this very conscientiously often. Again, you say you want to meet with me. You say you want to do with me. Again, my default is yes. I'm there. I'll be present. I'll help you, whatever it might be. But at times when I am reflecting on, boy, what position is this person in? What position am I in? If I help this person, am I actually creating dependence on me? Or am I creating dependence on God? And just realize sometimes I get it right, sometimes I get it wrong, but the point I'm trying to do is try to get you more dependent on God. But again, it doesn't make it wrong to ask for help. I put up there the spiritual and the physical. Naturally when we're talking about physical help, that's something different. In other words, hey, I need help changing my oil or lifting the thing or, that. But give me faith. Help me believe. Help me pray. I can't. Help me overcome worry. I can tell you things. I can instruct you in the truth and the glory of God. But if you don't get to know God and He's personal to you, then now all of a sudden I'm not afraid because I know God and His presence is in my life. That's what I would want you to get to, not so I can continue to speak verses into your life, remind you about Philippians 4, 6, and 7, or the psalm that we read this morning, that the glory of God casts out fear. And so again, it's not. I don't want to make it seem like it's wrong to help or wrong to ask for help, but there is a point to be made in terms of what Gideon is saying here. No, I don't want to be a king. You shouldn't be regarding me as king. You should be regarding God as king, Him being the Lord of your life. And that is true of anyone in the congregation. I don't care how old you are. You're 8, you're 12, you're 15, you're 22, you're 50, you're 78. You can be a spiritual giant. You can know God as much as God needs to be known, and you are the one that's preventing that. God is never the one preventing that. And so therefore, what are we doing to, again, seek the help and counsel of God rather than a person? And so what's unfortunate is after Gideon makes this great statement, he doesn't act in a way consistent with it. He's going to have the people bring earrings so he can make what's called a gold ephod. And it's like Gideon, it's one of those things where, the statement he makes is great, but what he did afterward is lousy. So there's got to be something corrupting in Gideon's heart. Like maybe he's saying on the outside, glorify God, but maybe he wants to be glorified some too. That I'm going to, it's reminiscent, if you wouldn't automatically think about this, about Aaron making the golden calf, right? He goes, bring your earrings, bring your gold, and I'll make someone to worship. Moses has been on the mountain too long. So the right thing for Gideon to do is say, okay, now let's build an altar. Let's make a sacrifice. Let's mark this place in terms of God's presence here and glorify Him and worship Him. That's the far better thing to do. But then where it starts falling apart in verses 24 through 27, and he said, I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder. It was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. So again, that's what they took from as the plunder from the battle. They answered, we'll be glad to give them. So they spread out a garment, and each man threw a ring from his plunder onto it. The weight of the gold rings he asked for would to 1,700 shekels. That was about 43 pounds, not counting the ornaments, the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, or the chains that were on the camels' necks. Gideon made the gold into an ephod, which he placed in Ophrah, that's his town. Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. So again, you win the battle, but you lose the war. Like the better thing that's going to come from 300 men defeating 135,000 men isn't God great? Shouldn't God be worshiped? Again, what he did in the context of us. It just goes to show how quickly we can go astray. Sometimes we are weakest when we are strongest. We must remain vigilant. What we're going to see is after they do this, they actually devolve into idol worship. They forget about Gideon. They don't treat Gideon well. They don't regard his family well in terms of what they should do for all God did through him. And again, like we say in the book of, how can they do that, right? How could the Israelites defy God this way? How could they have a leader that builds them up and gets them straight, and the minute that leader is gone, they're gone? They devolve into idol worship. How can that happen? And yet the sad thing is I would just about assure you that same heart is inside you. That same heart is inside me. Have you ever been in a place where the knowledge of God is strong, the power of God is strong, you're in church, you come from a Bible study, you're in your study or your prayer, and you're memorizing verses or whatever, then all of a sudden, some temptation comes over your heart. And it's not, the significance isn't that the temptation comes into your heart, you start following it. You start thinking it. All of a sudden, that thing seems to point, and so you go from, boy, I was just worshiping God, to I'm sinning. And that was within a half hour. See, I would suggest that we are more like the Israelites than not like the Israelites. And so that's why the intentionality, the vigilance, the pursuit that we need to have in terms of the glory of God is great. We need to press close. We need to continue to pursue. Again, the worship of God, the knowledge of God, the glory of God, pressing that into our hearts all the time. Because again, that is the defense. Why don't I do this thing? Why didn't I go there? Why don't I say the thing or do the thing or think the thing, look at the thing? Why don't I do that? Because God is great. Because God is pure, because God is holy, because God is loving. God knows what's right. God's trying to protect me. He's trying to keep me from things and a person and a kingdom that would destroy me. But again, we have to be vigilant in that faith. We have to be vigilant in that knowledge and keeping ourselves primed in the context of that. So now when the temptation comes in, it's not we follow the temptation, we guard against it, we set it aside, we hold that thought captive to the sufficiency and glory of Christ. And so I think Israel and Judges is this model because, again, we're more like them than unlike them. But again, to think about the dynamics of see, there is the part of what I said in the slide before that creates this. And as when you are depending on a leader, when you are depending on a person to lead the charge and represent God before you, and you have nothing in yourself, well, all of a sudden that leader's not there, and now, I guess we had to build some altars. Some idols, some statues to worship. And all of a sudden, the worship of the Baals and the Ashtaroths, it all of a sudden looks good because there's not this person that's encouraging that worship of God. And so it does come back to what, and I probably would go to the men. Where are the men of Israel as Gideon dies? And they start saying, hey, let's build that altar of Baal again. Let's get that Ashtaroth pole back again. And where are the men that say, no, God is with us. God is the reference point. God is who we follow. And it was absent, that type of influence. And so we have to make sure that that's not missing in our lives. That's not missing in our families. That's not missing in the context of the church. That's someone coming forward. So this is the truth. This is the way we go. This is what we do. Now, when it comes to chapter 9, there's not much edifying in Judges chapter 9. And so I'm going to do my best in the 6 minutes we have to tell you the story of chapter 9. And so basically, Abimelech, who is the next judge of Israel, is a son of Gideon. Basically, Gideon had 70 sons and many wives, the end of chapter 8 says. And when Abimelech was the son of a concubine that he had that lived in Shechem. And so basically, Abimelech goes to the men of Shechem, where he's their brother, he's the one that they know, and says, well, who should rule Israel? Should it be the 70 sons of Gideon? And they say Jerubbaal. But anyways, that's Gideon's other name. And so basically, who should be king? Should it be me or the 70 sons? And they say, the men of Shechem, it should be you. And so therefore, what Abimelech does is he gets some money from the worship of the false gods, of the Baal temple, gets the money and hires some savory characters. So basically, bad money gets bad people. And so basically, then he takes those bad people, goes to the place where Gideon lived, where his brothers were, and he kills them. All 70 of them. Just kills them on a stone. And what's interesting is they come and they anoint Abimelech king in the place where God probably promised Abraham, wherever your foot walks, that land is going to be yours. So the same place where this godly remembrance, this godly work of God's promise to Abraham, and sullied by this Abimelech being made king, at least in Shechem, but then again he becomes part of king of the judge in Israel as well. Now what happens as he's being crowned is the one brother that escapes, who is Jotham. Basically, he stands up on Mount Gerizim. And remember, Mount Gerizim is a place where they were called to declare the law, declare the blessings of God and the cursing of God, one mountain the other, and affirm their covenant with following God. And so he's on Mount Gerizim, and he calls out, and he tries to describe, gives him a parable, really, of who Abimelech is. And he describes Abimelech, compares him to an olive tree, a fig tree, and a wine vine. And so basically, the people of Shechem came and tried to make the olive tree their king. But the olive tree said, well, if I'm your king, you're going to take my olive oil. And so all these things that are life-giving and would be good, and if you made those things kings, they would bring good to you. But then he combines Abimelech to a thorn bush, to the bramble bushes that are in the desert, and he says, this is who you've made king. And the only thing that comes from that is fire and destruction, and so you're going to be destroyed. But then Jotham, after he's on the mountain declaring that, runs away because he's afraid of Abimelech. And so at this point in time is when God starts to work. Like basically, because he recognized the injustice that happened in the 70 brothers being killed, he sends a wedge between Abimelech and the people of Shechem. And so the people of Shechem, being evil people, they supported Abimelech in killing his 70 brothers. And so basically what they start doing, they start pillaging caravans, going through the area and robbing them. And so basically that sullies Abimelech's name. Probably takes profit from him in terms of tariffs that those traders would pay him coming through, and they're stealing things and ruining Abimelech's reputation. And so now there's this guy, Gaal, that comes up, and it's almost like he's at a party in Shechem, and he says, who is this guy? Abimelech isn't living in Shechem at this point. He has a representative Zerbah there. And so basically this Gaal says, who's Abimelech? I can beat him in a fight, basically. And so basically what happens is that, again, the details of the battle aren't really important. Basically, Abimelech wins. So basically, Abimelech's guy in Shechem deceives Gaal in terms of what's going on in the battle. He goes out, he gets defeated by Abimelech, and then all the people of Shechem run into a tower that's near Shechem, and Abimelech burns it and kills all the people. And so then there's another Thebes or whatever the town is that also followed Abimelech. And so now Abimelech, followed Shechem. They were connected with the Shechemites, coming against Abimelech. So again, they're in a tower. Again, Abimelech is trying to do the same thing to burn that tower. And a lady at the top of the tower takes a millstone, drops it down, and cracks his head. And he dies. And so therefore, what the whole point, the primary point is God's justice prevails. Like you don't do something unjust in the context of God's plan and not answer for that in terms of what would happen to you. So that's not a bad rendition, but you see nothing edifying, nothing that you would try to learn a lesson from, but a few lessons from it, and I'll try to do this in 45 seconds or less. It really does speak to the benefits of monogamy and commitment in marriage. What comes when you have 70 sons from various wives, and the intrigue and the jealousy and the lack of confidence, and who am I to my father, who am I to my mother, where do I stand, bada, bada, bada. Again, the reason why God said, one man, one woman have children. And now all those children, there's this connectedness in biology and fidelity towards that's my mom and dad. If that got broken at some point in time in your life, it's fine. Do the best you can. But there's just a value in two people being married, having children, and having the same children between a man and a woman. It's a danger of pride and self-centeredness. Basically, there's no point in time that Abimelech cries out to God, seeks God, wants God. Just the opposite. You're willing to give me money from the temple of Baal? I'll take it. And I'll do whatever I can to win and get things done. And what I would say is that we are not the type of people that will kill people. You're not going to burn people in a tower. But again, do we misuse people? At any point in time, do we have power that can either help or hurt? And we choose to hurt? Again, we don't want to be, that's not Jesus people. Jesus people help the vulnerable. They take care of people that can't do and can't take care of themselves. And the last point I would make, as people defy the ways of God and don't live by the Spirit, might makes right, and people, usually the most vulnerable, end up getting hurt. And then because I believe America is heading to a point where now all of a sudden God doesn't matter, God's standards don't matter, now law and authority don't matter, and so now every man is going to do what's right in their eyes. And again, that's not tomorrow, that's not next, but if you see the same things that I see in terms of what is being, I'm not going to be responsible for myself. I'm not going to get things done that take care of me. I'm going to expect someone outside of me to take care of me, and when they don't, I'm going to take it. If I can have more guns, or I can have more power, or I can be bigger, I'm just going to take it. Again, the pride and self-centeredness that is being encouraged and fostered, again, it's not about God. It's about self. And at some point in time, to take care of self, other people don't matter. Again, you defy God, you defy his conscience and spirit within you that cause you to say, people do matter. In fact, they matter more than me. The opposite happens. And the first ones that go are the vulnerable, the people that can't take care of themselves. And that is really the lesson of Abimelech in terms of just what he didn't do in terms of godliness and how he sought to corrupt the things of God or the people of Israel to really foster himself and do what he needed to do, but then not let anything stand in his way. Let's bow and let's pray. And so, Father, when we think about what would be encouraged and built up on in your word, to think about the good examples and the poor examples that exist in the book of Judges. Father, I just pray that we would be the kind of people that keep seeking you, that we do desire to have your power in our lives. And even though I say that a lot, it's always true in terms of just what you would be directed to in terms of the greatness of God, the availability of God, the fact that his word is in everyone's hands. It's always available. Prayer, your spirit. Father, I just pray that we would be those that stand strong. We'd be those that hang up, that wave a banner saying, yes, it's God. Yes, he's true. Yes, we should follow him. And so, Father, help us to be those people that are being more and more humble in the sight of you and letting you lift us up rather than us lifting ourselves up. And so we lift this all before you in the matchless name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.